Back in the 1980s, I found myself at an airport. Not unusual at all. Hello, David McMillan here, retired smuggler. And it's a story from the smuggling days back in the 80s that I'm telling today. I was running a courier network, and this involved making the goods, the dope, packed well as it was, appear to have come with the traveller from a non-source country. In this case, it was landing in Australia, and the smuggler, the courier, would appear to have brought it from the UK. There were three of us in the Melbourne Transit Lounge. The QF7 had just arrived from Bangkok. Curiously, it landed at Melbourne first and then went on to Sydney, which was its final stop. At Melbourne, the courier from Bangkok had brought his bag, left it on board, and he'd left. So Michael and I were in the transit lounge along with another courier who was there to pick up the second bag. We were killing a bit of time in the transit lounge when something surprising happened. I looked up, and there was my wife Clelia and Michael's wife Marie, dressed well and walking on as though they were travelling somewhere, which, of course, that's what they were ticketed to do. And why were they? Were they going on holiday? No, they were not. They were simply there to give me a message. Some months earlier, almost as an afterthought, I'd explained to Clelia that if you needed to get a message to somebody who is already in mid-operation, in flight, pretty much the only way to do it was to join up with them during one of their transit stops. So, if the operation meant that there was a midway transit stop, whoever had that message for you would have to buy a ticket and make sure the timing was such that they would be in the departure hall just as you were in transit. And you need to know your airports here. Sometimes they're in different places. Anyway, I met up with Clelia at the magazine stand, and she told me that she'd gone through this because she'd been given a warning by an old friend that the feds were waiting in Sydney to arrest a group who were smuggling drugs that day. There were no specifics, no names were mentioned, but it sounded pretty damn close enough for her to go to that much trouble. So, because Michael's wife was there, of course I had to tell him what was going on. I explained the situation, and he returned ready to march over to the other courier, the guy who was supposed to pick up the bag of dope and head through customs with it. Of course I stopped him. I said, Michael, why? What are you doing? What are you going to tell him? Are you going to tell him of our warning? Then what? What will he do when he gets to Sydney? Pick up the bag? I very much doubt it. He'll just take off. That will be the end of it. You gain nothing by telling him. I told Michael what I'd heard, the warning, and he almost immediately turned and headed over towards the main courier, the man who'd be picking up the stuff and walking through with it. Although his passport was kitchen clean, it showed no entry stamp to anywhere that was a source country. What would he do? I stopped Michael, of course. Michael, I said, what do you gain by telling him anything? You warn him, it freaks him out. What's he going to do when he gets there? He won't pick up the bag, he'll run. That's point one. And secondly, was this information any good? Couldn't tell. It was so specific. It was impossible to judge. I had only said that my friend had heard that the feds were waiting for an operation that would be concluded that day at the airport. There could actually be good news. It might mean that attention is being directed somewhere else. So I should scoop on that. But here's the point of this whole story. When is it worth saying something, and when is it better to keep quiet? Well, the fact is, 99% of the time, don't say anything. There's a great temptation for all of us to receive interesting information and immediately want to tell somebody about it. Sure, you use your judgment and you say, well, I can tell somebody who's got a sensible head. I can tell somebody who can be trusted. But even so, why worry them? Still young at that time, and today, of course, I wouldn't have said anything to anybody. The fact that the girls were there would have made Michael curious, so I guess I would have had to have said something to him. But certainly, what could he do about anything? What could I do about it? No, I had to judge that the situation would not be improved by saying a word, and that if something had gone wrong, all I need do is change the order slightly of who leaves the airport first. To placate nervous Michael, I said, well, you go out first, then I'll go, and then the courier. And that way I can see what's going on. He liked that because, of course, he was first out the door. The courier knew nothing. As it happened, we landed, and there was no problem at all. But that's not the point of this. Miss danger? No. It's when to speak and when not to speak. And most of the time, it's never to speak. Another small example of speaking and not speaking. I did business a few years ago in Scandinavia, in Sweden in particular, and I had a contact there. Now, this man, Wolf was his nickname, he was actually wanted, so he lived underground anyway. I contacted him through a roundabout way, through a middleman, when I needed to see him. He was a good payer and very discreet, so it was good to go there to Sweden once a month and pick up $250,000. Anyway, I was making a telephone call from the central station, using the payphones there. Of course, there's many of them, and many people use them, so it's a kind of place where you'd make such calls. The trip that time was just to visit a safety deposit box and to change some more money, so I had no business with Wolf. But I looked up from my payphone, a few booths along, and there he was, my friend, my deep contact, a man who lived underground who was already wanted. I ended my call and started to walk towards him. Yet with every step I took, I asked myself, David, what are you going to say? Hi there, nice running into you. Think of what somebody receives information. How do they take it? If I went to him and just said hello, a man who's very careful what he does and careful where he does it, how would he react? Would he accept that it was just a coincidence that I happened to run into him as he surfaced from wherever he came from to make his calls? Maybe. It was not that unusual to, I guess at Stockholm at the time there were probably 12 places in the center of the city where there are a lot of payphones. So it wasn't perhaps that unusual, and it was the kind of drug dealer's hours, 2 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when we used to do pretty much all of our work. So, sure, the coincidence was not so great, but there was no advantage in saying anything. Now, perhaps we should all, even in our regular lives, ask ourselves, why am I telling this person this bit of information? To show off? To be proud that I have it? To tell them something they need to know, or something we imagine they need to know? In fact, they probably don't. That t-shirt I should have had printed that says, almost everything is not worth saying, is something that should be etched on the minds of everybody. It might seem cruel, callous, and distant to say so, but these standards of withholding information are not a cruelty, but in fact they're considered. You certainly have those standards when you go to a business meeting. People you don't know. You're careful what you say. You're thoughtful. You try and listen. You watch their movements. You see that what they do doesn't match what they say. Should you apply those standards in the rest of your life? I think you should. In the underground world, there's many reasons for not to speak. There's the danger. There's perhaps the leak of information to the authorities. There's not wanting competitors to know what you're doing. But these are still basic standards that should apply. Do you need to tell your partner, your wife, a friend, everything you come to know? Or really anything you come to know? You'd be surprised how happy people are with the conversation in which they are supplying all the information and in which you are imparting very little at all. They will look back on that conversation as one of warmth and friendship, even though they've learned perhaps nothing about you. What they should come to learn about you is what you want them to know. If this seems difficult to do, it's only because we become conditioned to pleasing people. And somehow, we often have the mistaken belief that pleasing people includes giving them information that they don't already have. Usually, they're never pleased with that. And I can assure you, you'll never be pleased with the outcome. So, say nothing. Just listen. And when you do speak, make sure there's a damn good reason to do it.